Okay, the subcommittee of T&I, Water Resources and Environment, will come to order. A couple housekeeping. I ask unanimous consent that Mr. Farrenhold may be included in today's hearing. Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the hearing record be kept open for 30 days after this hearing in order to accept written testimony for the hearing record. Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. Welcome to today. Today we're having a hearing on the one-year anniversary after the enactment and the implementation of the Water Resources Reform and Development Act of 2014. 1 year ago, a strong bipartisan message was sent by Congress and the President with the enactment of the Water Resources Development Act, Reform Development Act of 2014. Congress has made a conscious effort in WRRDA 2014 to enhance America's competitiveness by strengthening investments in the nation's water resource infrastructure, including ramping up Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund expenditures for their intended purposes. A priority of any administration should be put in the United States at a competitive advantage in the world markets, especially since world trade patterns are expected to be dramatically different when the Panama Canal expansion begins operational early next year. Additionally, when Congress enacted WRRDA 2014, there were several high-priority provisions included in the law. Provisions that related to the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, the Inland Waterways Trust Fund, permit processing, project acceleration, and a new mechanism for project authorizations, WIFIA, public-private partnerships, and the deauthorization of old and inactive projects were included in the law that was signed by the President in June of 2014. Yeah, 14. I forgot what year it was. Second there. While the WRRDA law is transformative and in some places complicated, we remain disappointed at the pace and the prioritization at which the Corps of Engineers is carrying out the drafting of the implementation guidance. Today, at the one-year anniversary of the enactment of WRRDA 2014, we would hope and expect the Corps would put more of a priority in writing the implementation guidance. After all, WRRDA is the law of the land. It is not a suggestion for the administration to casually disregard. Much of the implementation guidance that has been issued tracks closely with the intent of Congress, with a few exceptions. However, these guidance documents pertain to some of the less complex provisions contained in WRRDA 2014. The Corps appears to have done an excellent job in following congressional intent associated with the study acceleration provisions, specifically the issuance of the 3x3x3 guidance. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for the implementation of the new authorization provisions carried out pursuant to Section 7001 of WRRDA 2014. The annual report is intended to reflect a broad spectrum of activities for Congress, not the administration, to consider in authorizing future water resources projects. The job of the Corps under Section 7001 is primarily an administrative one. That is, the Corps is to collect proposals, screen them against the 5 criteria in the law, and simply report the findings. The contents of the first annual report did not meet this committee's expectations, not only in terms of the number of proposals submitted by non-federal project sponsors, but also how the administration used this process as a way to promote their priorities and not those of their customers. We look forward to fixing this process going forward. For some of the more complex provisions like WIFIA and contributed funds, the Corps customers, the non-federal stakeholders, are still waiting to benefit from these sorts of reforms provided in WRRDA 2014. Even some of the common sense provisions like the use of benchmarking for non-federal improvements to federal projects, permit acceleration activities through Section 214 program, or the public-private partnership provisions are suffering from what happens to be an inattention from the Corps. WRRDA 2014 accelerated the project delivery process, promoted fiscal responsibility, strengthened transportation networks, increased transparency, and increased congressional oversight in prioritizing future water resources investment. WRRDA 2014 was transformative. It is complex and requires thoughtful implementation by the Corps to ensure it carries out the intent of Congress. While implementation has not met the committee's expectations so far, we look forward to continue to work with the Corps to ensure that WRRDA 2014 is carried out in a fashion that benefits the nation. I want to pass on a note of thanks to General Peabody. While General Peabody is not an official witness today, he is at the table and he joins the hearing to answer some of the more complex questions. General Peabody is retiring from the United States Army in the coming weeks, and he is a native of my home state of Ohio. And I want to thank him for his distinguished service of 35 years in the military service and wish him in the future. And I also look forward to testimony from General Bostic.
Today's hearing on the status of implementation of WRRDA 2014, which today is its anniversary, first anniversary. I wish to welcome our two witnesses, Honorable Joel N. Darcy and Lieutenant General Thomas Bostic, and thank them for their service to our country and also to their hardworking staff, which we have great respect for. It's good to see you both again. But before I proceed, I'd like to take just a brief moment to thank both of you for your work on the final Clean Water Protection Rule. Along with the EPA's, your organization put a great deal of time, over a decade, and effort into crafting of the final rule, and it is very evident. Thank you for your thoughtfulness with which you engage state, local governments, and other stakeholder organizations. I do believe the final rule responded to many concerns, as well as the criticisms of the proposed rule, and we're grateful for your dedication to protect our nation's water resources. I'd also like to thank you for the great degree of flexibility and responsiveness you have shown us in Southern California as we respond to historic continuing drought. Also, the deviation of the Whittier Narrows Dam will eventually increase the amount of water captured and conserved for groundwater recharge in the area and is indicative of the types of solution-oriented flexibility we need to deal with in drought conditions, especially as regards to the acceptance of non-federal funds to help on important projects throughout the West. With no end in sight of the drought, I expect there will be many more opportunities in the future for all to work together, not only in California water conservation efforts, but all the Western states. Again, thank you so very much. As for today's hearing topic, implementation of WRRDA 2014, the Department of the Army and the Corps of Engineers have now had a year to develop implementation guidance for a variety of reforms. Most important to the West and to California, Western states and to California, is the water supply issue, that the dams capture and recharge some of our aquifers. The public-private partnership, the funds of being able to allow acceptance of those, which we've been working on for at least 5-6 years, and also to the Port Trust Fund, the implementation, being able to get some of those funds back to do the work that needs to be done in our ports. WRRDA 2014 had a goal of increasing flexibility at the core of engineers and modernizing the programs. Our reforms were intended to assist the Corps' project delivery process by accelerating the method by which the projects and studies are carried out. And as the chairman was pointing out, we have some concerns about those, how fast those are being carried out. The Corps has been slow to implement the reforms contained in 2014's WRRDA. Implementation guidance has been issued for only 40%. The provisions in WRRDA, for those provisions. And we had expected the Corps would swiftly embrace the reforms of WRRDA, but I am concerned that declining budgets have limited your ability to complete the work. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to clarify that somewhere along the line, because if you're getting less and asked to do more, I think we need to understand that that's hampering your ability to get the work done. In particular, I'm concerned the Corps has not issued any guidance for Section 1046 of WRRDA 2014, a section intended to assess the management practices of Corps' reservoirs in arid regions of the country and their impacts to water supply during periods of drought. The findings of this assessment and your recommendations could be part of the solution to the drought. As of today, we don't see any guidance on those issues. That said, I'm happy to welcome our witnesses back to the subcommittee, and our goal is to continue to expand the dialogue between the Corps and our subcommittee so we can move forward to achieving a common goal of meeting our nation's water resource needs in an expedient manner that protects public safety, allows for economic viability, and ensures the protection and improvement of the environment. And Mr. Chairman, I agree with you. I think we need to work together, and I'd be happy to provide any assistance I can. Thank you so very much. Now yield back.
This time I recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, the chairman of the T&I, Bill Schuster.
Thank you, Chairman Gibbs, and thanks for Secretary Darcy, General Bostic, and General Peabody for being here today. It is critical that we get water resources back on the congressional schedule of doing it every Congress, and that's our intent, is to do that not this year but next year in this Congress. I think it's important to make sure that these projects move forward and that we have consistent oversight. As we turn the page to the next WRRDA, there's major issues of implementation that we don't think are being followed. For instance, the Section 214, which we put in there, which we thought would be very helpful to the Corps, providing dollars from the private sector to help move projects forward, and extremely helpful, we believe, to the private sector. It seems to be slow-walking implementation, and for the life of me, I can't understand that. It would be helpful, as I said, to both the Corps' mission and to standing up these projects and moving them forward. Even more concerning, administration seems to be misinterpreting the new project authorization process that we established under WRRDA. The annual report required under WRRDA gave the Corps the opportunity to provide Congress with a list of non-federal projects, sponsor priorities that reflect the needs of the nation. Instead, the administration chose to provide Congress a list of the Corps' priorities. And we were pretty clear in setting out the criteria that are related to the mission and authorities of the Corps. 1, 2, require specific congressional authorization included by the act of Congress. 3, have not been congressionally authorized, which is key, which was the major part of the reform, is to be able to move these projects forward without waiting on the federal government. Instead of letting these projects sit around and wait for years and years and years, the locals can come up with the money and continue to see these projects move forward. I think it's absolutely critical. The 4th is to have not been included in any previous annual report, and the 5th, if authorized, could be carried out by the Corps of Engineers. So, again, these are key provisions in the last water bill that don't seem to be moving forward. The priorities of the states and local governments aren't being met. And again, that annual report was intended to reflect the broad spectrum of activities of Congress, not the administration, to considering authorizations for future water resource projects. So I expect the Corps to address these. As we move to the next water resources bill, we're going to have to just tighten them up. I just don't understand why these, what I think are, and voted on in an extremely bipartisan way in this Congress with a vote of 400 and some to very few. This is something the Congress wants. This is something the Corps should take up and with breakneck speed move these forward. So I look forward to hearing your testimony today, and yield back. Thank you.
Recognize the gentleman from Oregon, the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Fazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank the Corps for being here. Actually, I'm a fan of the Corps, but I think you're going to hear some concern and frustration from a number of us up here today in the execution of the last Water Resources Development Act. First, let's put down a marker. Last time I checked, and someone on the panel can probably correct me, the Corps had more than a $40 billion backlog of critical infrastructure that needed repair or replacement. That's not acceptable. In the last WRRDA bill at the end of the year, the industry itself, the inland waterway users, wanted an increase in the diesel tax, and it was done in that year-end deal to begin to help defray some of the costs of the dysfunctional locks and levees and all the other problems that we have. So there's blame to go around here with the Congress. Secondly, when we talk about this section of the bill that the chairman was just talking about, this was an attempt to restore what I always thought was a good principle, which is those who are elected from local areas better understand the needs of their constituents and their infrastructure than the main offices of the federal bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. So we used to have earmarks. Now, earmarks got a bad name, won't go into that for various reasons, and they were banned. Well, that was stupid. So now we have a totally opaque process where spending priorities are determined somewhere in the administration, mostly by trolls over at OMB who are accountable to no one and who do things that are invisible to everybody until they pop up. So that was dumb. And we tried to get around that by requiring the Corps to evaluate locally submitted projects. And the Corps, perhaps at the behest of OMB, followed a Reagan-era executive order and refused to follow the statutory requirements put on them by Congress, and gave us back an anemic little list and excluded everything else, and said they had substituted under the Reagan executive order their own priorities. And that they had authority to ignore us because we didn't say they couldn't use other criteria. Well, obviously, we will correct that in the next bill. We will say these are the only criteria you may use, period. End of story. Statute, law, signed by the President. You have to follow it, no matter what some jerk down at OMB says. Now, but we've got a couple years till we get there, or a year and a half, and I would hope that we can be more productive during that time period in revisiting this issue, this year, and that we can get freed from these. It's really clear what the intent of Congress was, and if someone in the administration wants to stonewall us, that would be very unfortunate. I would hope that this year we get more compliance with that statute, and I also hope that we begin to recognize that the Corps is underfunded. These are critical infrastructure needs. There's a difference between investment and just plain old spending, and we need to be investing more in bringing it up to a state of good repair. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome our panel today. Today we have Assistant Secretary of the Army, Ms. Secretary Darcy. We have General Bostic, Chief of Engineers, Army Corps Engineers, and assisting at the witness table is General Peabody. So, Secretary Darcy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and distinguished members of the committee. We're honored to be here today to testify about the implementation of the Water Resources Reform and Development Act of 2014. WRRDA of 2014 provides new authorities to the Secretary of the Army to support the nation's water resources needs by transforming existing processes and further enhancing collaboration with our stakeholders. As the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, I'm responsible for the overall supervision of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as we develop the guidance and the authorities of WRRDA 2014. My goal is to continue to improve the Army's ability to serve the changing water resources needs of this nation and to integrate water resources management. In order to implement WRRDA 2014, guidance is written to provide a common understanding of how the law will be implemented and which policies need to be amended to ensure consistent application of the law across the nation. Implementation guidance is prepared in a thoughtful manner, which takes time. A draft of the guidance is developed by and vetted within the Corps and then coordinated with my staff and Army General Counsel. As WRRDA 2014 contains many provisions that significantly change the way the Corps operates, we sought public input in developing our implementation guidance. He held 4 listening sessions between August and September of 2014 with over 800 individuals participating in the sessions. We gained valuable information from these stakeholders regarding their views on the implementation of many of the WRRDA 2014 sections. In addition, we accepted written comments as well. In October of 2014, the comments from the listening sessions and the written comments were compiled, organized by sections of the Act that they related to, and distributed to the subject matter experts within the Corps for their use in drafting implementation guidance. We have given priority for implementation guidance to national policy provisions and to those project and program provisions where funds have been appropriated. All completed guidance is posted on the Corps' website. I will provide the link to this website. It's in the written testimony with General Bostic. Our joint written testimony focuses on the major categories of the national policy provisions contained within the Act and the key provisions in those categories. These categories include project development and delivery, deauthorizations and backlog prevention, alternative financing, sponsor-led studies and construction, levee safety, work-in-kind credits, expediting the evaluation and processing of permits, navigation, and water supply and reservoir management. Implementation of this very important legislation has been and remains a priority for the Army and for the Corps. Now I yield to General Bostic.
General Bostic, welcome.
Chairman Gibbs, Ranking Member Napolitano, Full Committee Chair Schuster, and Ranking Member DeFazio, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm honored to testify before you today, along with Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, the Honorable Joe Ellen Darcy, on the implementation of Water Resources Reform and Development Act 2014. The United States of America is extremely blessed by natural resources, particularly our rivers and harbors, and the history of our nation is written on our waterways. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has proudly served on the nation's waterways since the very beginning, building coastal fortifications, dredging channels, and designing and constructing locks, dams, and other navigation features. Today, we remain the world's continental maritime nation. No other country even approaches the blessings of reliable access to oceans and inland waterways as the United States. The ability to leverage our extensive interior navigable waterway system is essential to our economic advantage and geopolitical dominance. The nation's harbors, channels, and waterways handle approximately 2.3 billion tons of commerce annually. 98% of overseas trade, valued at more than $1.72 trillion, moves through core projects. Starting in the early 19th century, the development of multi-purpose projects helped to provide additional benefits to the nation. 1 out of every 4 megawatts of hydropower produced in the United States is generated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers power plants. We are the largest renewable energy producer in the United States. Additionally, we welcome over 370 million visits a year at 403 lakes and river projects in 43 states. As the nation's communities were devastated by floods, coastal storms, and other natural disasters, our mission expanded to include flood and storm risk reduction. Historically, USACE projects avoid $8 of damage for every $1 invested. In 2014 alone, our projects prevented over $14 billion worth of damage. In just the past few weeks, our projects have been severely tested by the incredibly heavy rains in Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas, where all initial reports are that the USACE projects have played a major role in assisting those states. Following the passage of the nation's environmental laws in the 1970s, our mission expanded further to cover environmental stewardship and restoration. Scores of rivers, wetlands, and water bodies have been protected by core regulatory programs or restored and enhanced by core disposal facilities, research, and environmental projects. Historically, our water resources and maritime transportation system have made us the envy of other nations. However, the state of our nation's infrastructure today is threatening our national security. The American Society of Civil Engineers has graded our infrastructure at a D+. According to the World Economic Forum, the quality of U.S. infrastructure ranks 14th in the world out of 144, 7 slots lower than in 2008. As we look forward, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is continuing to implement the reforms outlined in WRRDA 2014, as we have done with previous WRRDA legislation, including successful implementation of the planning modernization for chiefs reports. For example, during the 7 years since the inception of the Civil Works transformation efforts in 2008, 48 chiefs reports have been completed. During this time, 12 chiefs reports were completed in the first 4 years, and 35 were completed in the last 3.5. We are clearly becoming more efficient. This legislation is making a difference in our ability to deliver sustainable infrastructure projects that are economically viable, environmentally feasible, and technically justifiable. I look forward to our discussion today and to continue our work with members of this committee to improve the state of our nation's vital infrastructure. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I'll start off the questions. Ms. Darcy, in a recent 2016 budget hearing we had, in a letter, and we also in a letter, we requested a list of projects that met all 5 of the statutory criteria that was not included in the first annual report. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and would just make it easy for you, just yes or no, on all of them. First question, are you familiar with the Brazos Island Harbor Channel project in southeast Texas that has a signed chief's report? Are you familiar with that project?
Yes.
Okay. Has the chief's report been congressionally authorized?
No.
Does Congress need to authorize this chief's report that the Corps can carry it out?
Yes.
Okay. If authorized, could the Corps carry out the chief's report?
Yes.
Okay. Does the chief's report relate to the mission of the Corps of Engineers, your mission?
Yes, because I believe it's a harbor.
Yeah, your staff's shaking his head yes back there. Has the chief's report been in any previous annual reports in Congress? And I'll answer that one for you. It's obviously no.
No.
Okay. So we know there's one project in the appendix of the first annual report to Congress that's supposed to be included in the actual report. This was supposed to be a simple exercise. Now that we know there's at least this one project that met all 5 criteria, because those 5 questions I asked you is the 5 criteria, would you please provide us promptly a list of the list of projects that meet all the 5 criteria that are erroneously contained in the appendix? And I'd like to also say in the first report, there was 19 projects, studies, that was in the annual report, but there's 95 studies, projects, modifications that were in the appendix. And as we just demonstrated with Brazos Island project, that was in the appendix. It should have been in the chief's report, in the annual report, excuse me, as provided of what we did in WRRDA. You may respond.
And, Congressman, you asked for you wanted a list of the projects that were in the appendix that
meet
considered in
that meet the 5 criteria, as my ranking member, has stated so eloquently in his opening remarks. I just, it just, it amazes me that, I'm very concerned about, the administrative review process that the Corps is holding to. There's other ways for the administration to prioritize their projects. The President can do it in his budget when he offers his budget to Congress. But clearly in WRRDA 2014, we set up this mechanism, and as long as it meets those 5 criteria, it has to be in the report and not the appendix, because there's some consideration. If it's in the appendix, we can't act on it. And so that means if we, our goal, as Chairman Schuster said, to have a WRRDA bill done every Congress, but if it's in the appendix, we'd have to wait to get that in the next reports and the next WRRDA bill and see that delay mechanism. That's our concern. And so we're, being kind of adamant about we're holding this, meets those 5 criteria. It should be in the report. And so we make the decision, the representatives of the people here, and not the administration has other ways to voice their priorities. Ms. Darcy, in Section 1009 of the WRRDA 2014, Electronic Commerce required a report to the committee within 180 days of an enactment to demonstrate how the Corps is complying with the procurement law. While clearly the Corps of Engineers has missed this deadline, when can we expect to see the report as required in that section? Furthermore, can you characterize the discussion with the state agencies, local communities, and other federal agencies, software vendors, the contractor community, and others about the benefits of electronic bidding?
Chairman, I'll take this one. We have been working this very hard within the Corps. We believe this is something that we absolutely need to do. We're behind where we should be. We have 2 of our districts, our Savannah and Fort Worth, that are currently piloting an electronic receipt of proposals. We expect that in another 60 days we'll be able to put a report together to determine the way ahead. But we absolutely agree that we need to move forward in this area.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that, because I think my understanding was some stakeholders in the community, out in the vendor community, that there's some work being done in electronic procurement with DOD, but the Corps has been kind of out there and hasn't been where they need to be, at least with the rest of the Department of Defense. So I'm going to yield my time now, or not yield my time, but I look my ranking member for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly would like to post again the budget resources issue, Madam Secretary, that my colleague brought up. Do you need any additional personnel financial support in order to achieve full implementation? Because I know that's a critical question for me.
Congresswoman, we are operating within our fiscal constraints and are doing all that we can in order to get the implementation, and especially the implementation guidance, some that's been mentioned here today that's not complete yet, to be done as expeditiously as possible. And we've actually got a tiger team together from our districts to focus just on the implementation guidance over the next couple of months so that we can get this done.
Thank you. Under Title IV of 2014 Water Resources Law, several provisions addressing the growing water infrastructure crisis, financing, and the wastewater issue. In its subtitle C of that 2014 Title V, it authorized a new water infrastructure financing, or WIFIA, to encourage additional private sector financial. Do you have an update on implementation, and when can the program be ready for borrowers and lenders? And are you working with EPA and the Department of Transportation to learn from their experience in TIFIA?
Yes, we are. Actually, we're working closely with EPA. We're about to enter into a memorandum of understanding about how exactly we will be able to work this. As you know, this infrastructure bank for WIFIA is a loan guarantee program, and Corps of Engineers is not a loan guarantee or a granting agency, so trying to fit the provisions of WIFIA into our kinds of projects is something that we're trying to focus on and work through with EPA, and also looking to the experience of TIFIA with the Department.
Do you have any idea how long this is going to take, ma'am?
The staff is working this currently, and we believe this summer we'll have an analysis completed. So
I know, because
still
one of the programs may end out in September, and we're going to lose some funding from local private nonprofit or non-government entity.
We understand, Representative, and we're working this as aggressively as we can. As Secretary Darcy said, this is new for us, but
Right.
we've been working hard on a feasibility analysis of how this would fit into our program, getting smart on loan guarantees and working closely with the EPA. But this summer, we feel we should be able to have some resolution of the way ahead.
Please keep us informed. The other question to both of you is, I met with General Peabody last week or recently to get an update on the ongoing drought, which is quite critical in California and the western states, to look at the more flexibility for the water storage, especially in the purposes of the dams. The 2007 WRRDA, there was a provision for a drought study to encourage the Corps to work with Commerce, inventory actions that could be taken by agencies to reduce the impact of drought. And it was set back for lack of funding, I understand, and being called a lower priority. Given the fact that we have some serious drought issues in the West, I was just wondering if there is going to be a reprioritizing of this particular study that would be able to help the western states. And it's coming to mind, as General Bostic was mentioning, that Texas has an inordinate amount of water. Do you have any recommendations, in addition, of how we can store that water and refurbish or replenish aquifers? Because we will be continuing with drought cycles, as we are all aware of.
There are several things that we're working on. First, the deviations that we've made in the past year, we've learned a lot from those. We think on a case-by-case basis we can turn those decisions fairly quickly and allow for more water supply. The other thing we're working is our WRRDA, or Engineering Research and Development Agency, is working very closely with other interagency partners, and they have funding to look at atmospheric rivers and the possibility of rain in the atmosphere as it moves from the west to the east, to have better indication of when that will happen and how we can better prepare. The other thing we're working on is our dam certification and making sure that the dams are structurally sound, so that if we want to increase the amount of water, we're capable of doing that.
Especially in areas that are very critical. Could I get a commitment possibly to revisit the 2007 WRRDA study?
Congresswoman, I think we should take a look at that, given the
I'd really appreciate it.
we will take another look at that. And also, as far as your provision of, I think it's important to you, I think it's 1,046 in the WRRDA bill, where the process is ongoing to do that implementation guidance.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Schuster.
Thank you, Chairman Gibbs. And again, thanks everybody for being here. As I think Mr. DeFazio said, there's a lot of frustration on this committee dealing with the Corps. And as we went through the process last time, I thought we worked well with the Corps to try to put new programs, new procedures in place. And one of the first things we embraced was a core idea, was 3x3x3, which we thought it was great. We codified it, working with you folks. So again, the first thing is how many feasibility studies based on the new 3x3x3 program do you believe will be approved during this Congress between now and next year?
17 this year.
So that's in addition. There's 10 now, right? And then
An additional
7,
17.
or okay, so 17 total. All right. Well, again, I think it's a good program. That's what you folks developed, that we embraced it, and moved forward with it. Now, the Section 214 I spoke about, which is in the 2014 WRRDA, it's Section 1006, and that program has been in place as a small, I guess we call it a pilot project since 2000. Again, allowing the public utility companies, natural gas companies, and other public entities to participate in that, giving you the funds to help move the process forward. It doesn't guarantee them a permit. I don't understand why the implementation has been delayed. When you've already been doing it, it should be something that we just sort of turn the spigot on a little, open it up a little more so we get more things in the pipeline, so to speak. Can you talk to me about that?
That guidance is eminent. I needed to send a delegation authority to the Secretary of the Army to delegate it to me, which I've done, so I'm just waiting for that. So it should be, I'm telling you, any day now.
Imminent in Washington could mean a decade. I mean, we're talking about months?
No.
Is your understanding?
My understanding is less than months.
Okay, that's something. That's good news to hear, because again, I think that was one of the most important reforms we put in place. I know that industry is very eager, and I know that dealing with my colleagues at the time, Mr. Rahal, he was very, very supportive of that. So that's very good to hear. The second thing that I think Chairman Gibbs mentioned it is the annual report. You know, we really need to revisit that and make sure that these projects can move forward without authorizations. And there's a lot of them out there. Again, one of the major reforms you put in place, let's get these things moving. It should be helpful to you folks, too, to see projects moving forward. And then when Congress catches up, the money catches up, you can begin to participate. So I'd encourage you to keep working on that. The other thing that, and I'm not going to talk about it because I don't know the details. I know Mr. Rice is here. But the Port of Georgetown, which talked to the Corps came up with a number, the politicians, the local folks voted on a referendum, I believe, to fund it, and after it was funded, the Corps came back and said, oops, it's more money. You know, those are the kinds of things that happen, and what happens to the folks that represent the people in that area, go to the people and say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to open our port up, which is going to be a huge economic benefit to us, and then the Corps moves the goalposts on them. You know, that's something we need to revisit. I've been talking to Mr. Rice about it, and if there's any way that the folks at the Port of Georgetown could cut the Corps out, I would recommend they do that. Say, the hell with it. Let's just do it ourselves and not sit around and be jerked around on this thing. So, you know, those are the kinds of things that just cause tremendous frustration up here for members, and things like this tend to occur all over the country. So, you know, I would encourage you to revisit the Port of Georgetown and try to figure out a way, because it's an economic benefit. It's something good for the nation, and that should be something that I know you folks consider that. And again, these communities are just getting hammered by it. As I said, I think Mr. Gibbs covered it pretty well in his questioning. That those reports that come forward, the non-federal entities, you know, they're chomping at the bit to do this. So, you know, can you talk a little bit about, build upon what, you know, Mr. Gibbs said? Is that something that we're looking at, that you're going to be revisiting? And
Referring to the 7001 report?
Yes.
Yes. We put out additional guidance this year. I mean, each year we have to put a notice in the Federal Register in order to solicit the proposals from local sponsors and from non-federal entities. And we made some changes in that this year. I think we've made it clearer about what's needed in the proposals in order for us to consider them. Because last time we didn't really get cost estimates that were universal, and some of them had cost estimates for a study but not for construction. So if hopefully these proposals, we've also asked our division and district commanders to work closely with the proponents of these proposals in advance of their submission of them, so that they know just exactly what's required and what's needed. And some of them, I think this was a confusion also, that if there was an existing authority that the Corps already had, that's the project would be in the appendix. And I think some of those authorities weren't clear. So if there's an existing authority, there's no additional authorization needed for a proposal. So that was a confusion, I think, too.
Well, and I know Chairman Gibbs requested a list of those. Can you commit to giving it to us?
Yes.
So we can see them?
Yes.
Okay, commitment. And just finally, I know my time has expired, but the disappointing rate of implementation, I know our folks are saying it's 20%, you're saying it's 40%. I'd like the General to commit to a weekly teleconference with our staff to keep us updated on what's happening with the pace of implementation.
Certainly, Chairman, we'll do that. One of the things I think that's different, or I know that's different, in this case than before is we've kind of made haste slowly as we moved into this.
What's that? I didn't hear that.
We made haste slowly. We went quickly, but we were cautious because we went out and talked to a lot of the public. We wanted to make sure we had listening sessions to allow them, before we jumped into our work, we did a number of listening sessions to let the public talk about their concerns. And then we took that into consideration. So we got off to a little bit of a slower start than we would have liked, but we're moving out now, and we think we're in a good path forward, and we'll keep you up to date.
Thank you very much. Yield back.
Mr. DeFazio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, let me just get this straight. It's in response to Mr. Gibbs and Mr. Schuster. You are now going to respond to question 2 in our letter of April 21st, which is those projects that went into the appendix. You are now going to evaluate each of those projects under the 5 criteria and only the 5 criteria submitted by Congress and provide that back to us. Is that correct? Is that what you just said?
What I just said was that the Congressman Gibbs asked for a list of those projects that were in the appendix.
Yeah, well, we have that because that's easy. We can look at the
you,
appendix. That's what you referred me to in response to the letter. What we asked for was you take each one of those projects and apply yes or no to the 5 criteria enumerated in the statute. Is that my understanding? We're going to get that?
We will do that. Yes, we will.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, now I don't want to get anyone on the spot, although since General Peabody's retiring in 2 weeks, congratulations, sir. You could answer the Mike Parker question. Now, some might remember Mike Parker, and I asked Mike in a hearing here, I said, is this budget adequate to meet the critical needs of the nation's infrastructure as relates to the Corps' mission? And Mike said no. A week later, he resigned for family reasons. Anybody want to answer the question today? General?
Well, sir, I'll tell you that I've been personally counseled by Mr. Parker to avoid his example. Sir, in my personal judgment, it's clear that this nation has lost sight of, as a nation, and I don't think this is exclusive to any particular branch of the government or any echelon of the government, but the nation has lost sight of the importance and the reliance of our infrastructure to the health of our economy and of the natural resources that infrastructure helps preserve and maintain. We're partly, I think, victims of our success. As General Bostic said earlier, we built out this great infrastructure, and at one point in the middle to latter part of the last century, we were clearly the envy of the world. I don't think that is necessarily the case in all circumstances. So I think one of our biggest challenges is really to understand the inherent value of that infrastructure and the alternative histories that did not happen because that infrastructure exists. And the clearest example in my own mind is the great flood of the 2011 Mississippi River flood, which is the greatest flood in the recorded history of that river. And yet, in contrast to the 1927 flood, it was not a catastrophe. In that flood alone, well over $230 billion of damages were prevented as a result of the expansive Mississippi River and tributaries project. But because the catastrophe did not occur, it's very difficult for our citizenry to understand the impact of and the value of this infrastructure. So to me, it's really one of understanding the value and then making investment choices on how to fund that. In my personal opinion, we don't have to do that from the federal government. That's why I think it's very important that we continue to work with the Congress on some of the alternative financing provisions that you've included in this WRRDA, which I think are a good first step, but I also think need to be further developed and expanded upon. It's something that we need to pursue. So I think how we fund it is the critical question for the nation to continue to contend with.
Well, thank you, General. That's the best response I've ever gotten to that question, and I agree wholeheartedly with it, and you did it very diplomatically. So thank you. Quick question about the 10% set-aside. Seems to be some confusion. Some of my ports have heard that someone in the bowels of OMB has interpreted the 10% to be a cap and not a floor. Secretary Darcy, can you tell me whether it's a cap or a floor?
I see it as a guideline as to what should be in the bill.
That's kind of evading the question. So it's not a cap.
It's not a cap.
Okay, that's the best I can do, probably. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would like to thank General Peabody for your comments. The region to which you referred, obviously that's my district is a big part of that, and I appreciate that. It was very historic, and everything functioned as it should have. So the evidence of what was spent and the technology and the resources that went into that weren't as readily apparent had there been considerably more damage and loss of life. So it's a hard thing to communicate to folks who actually benefit from that. But thank you for your insights and your comments, and I wish you well in your retirement. I know we're here to talk about WRRDA, but Madam Secretary, I just have a few quick questions on WOTUS. Has the rule been finalized at this point?
The rule's been finalized, but it has not been published in the Federal Register as of this morning.
Why not?
It's a process that is done through the Office of Management and Budget, and it's merely mechanical at this point. I mean, the rule has been signed and has been finalized. It just has not yet been appeared in the register.
When do you expect to have that submitted?
I would expect it within the week.
Have there been any responses to comments or other support documents been finalized?
The response to comments document, yes.
They have been?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let me ask you this on WRRDA. Section 1047 of WRRDA authorizes special use permits for recreational activities at public recreation areas that you see around lakes and reservoirs operated by the Corps, and for the fees generated at those locations to be retained and used on site, the site collected. What progress has the Corps made in finalizing the guidance on that provision?
It's been finalized, right?
I believe that's under development.
I can't read this. Yes.
The special permit is under review currently.
It's under review.
Review.
Okay, I'm concerned about the progress on that. Do you anticipate a date when the Corps might finalize that guidance?
The headquarters has forwarded it to my office, so it should be, I'm not going to use imminent, but any day now.
Okay. Again, a little concerned about the slow progress made in the implementation of WRRDA. Today is 365 days. Why is the Corps implemented just under 40% of a law that was enacted a year ago? I mean, it seems like there's been slow progress, Madam Secretary.
Part of it, let the Secretary talk. At the last word, it was primarily projects, 2007, and this is more process and policy and working through the law. So, again, before we started running and implementing the guidance, we went out and we had listening sessions to make sure that we were listening to Congress, but also listening firsthand to the local people on what their interests and concerns were. And then we came back and started implementing the guidance. You're correct. We're at 38% now. We believe we'll be at about 50% by the end of the calendar year, and within the 2-year period that we're required, finish most of the work.
Okay. How are you prioritizing at this point? It seems like they may have been kind of focused on low-hanging fruit instead of the more consequential guidance on critical items. For example, the Section 1047 that I referred to earlier. How are you prioritizing?
Actually, we prioritized by looking at the hardest first. We went to the very tough issues that we thought we needed to tackle and took those on first. We also looked at resources and time available. When we saw that we needed more people, we put a Tiger team together and brought them in. So, again, we got off to a slow start, but we believe we've got the people and the process in place to continue to move out smartly.
Thank you. Before I yield again, General Peabody, I wish you well in your retirement. Your leadership in the MR&T and Mississippi Valley Flood Control and those issues has been very much appreciated by my constituents, and wish you all the best in your retirement. Yield back.
Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the chair and ranking member for having this hearing and celebrating the anniversary. My question really goes to the general progress of where we are. Back in, I think it was 2007, there was a study done, even before then, maybe 2002, that said that we would need about 17 or 18 billion dollars every term for 20 years to catch up on the needs for core programs, projects. Where are we as relate to that study in progress?
Is your question, Congresswoman, what is our backlog or what is our current expenditure rate?
Backlog and projects, where are we in terms of the needs of the infrastructure needs, water needs of the country, and moving along with where it was determined by a major study back then?
Well, we're operating our program within the budget constraints that we're faced with. One thing as a result of WRRDA 2014 that I think has been a great addition to what we're doing is the requirement that we look at deauthorizations, and that's underway. And I think that is going to give us a better handle on not only what we have that's out there, but what is no longer required to be part of our inventory as to water resources projects that are still viable for the country. So I think as a result of that, we're going to be able to get a better understanding and handle on just exactly what how to look forward with those projects that are no longer necessary.
Yeah, I know that what the budget restraints are, but I was wondering whether or not we were keeping pace to the needs. I'm from Dallas, Texas, as you know, and we've just had floods. And thank God we have the pump station going that saved a lot of homes from being flooded as much this time, and some of the work on the Trinity River paid off. But I know that it could have been better. We could have been farther along. But I know that other places are dealing with some of this major weather change and the type of flooding disasters we're having. And based on that was a very major study back then on what was projected the needs to be. Whether you get there will obviously depend on what we're willing to do here. But I wondered how far we've come in attempting to address the major needs and how they will continue to occur, because this study predicted that it would take $17, $18 billion every term for 20 years in order to come even with what the needs were at that time.
I don't have a number for you, Congresswoman, but what I would say is that it goes back to our challenge with the requirements and the resources as a country overall. If you look at this year's budget, we have a little over $1 billion, maybe 1.2 in construction. If we were to complete all of the construction of the projects that we are going to work with that money, it's about $23 billion we would need. We're obviously not going to have that. So, simple math, it's about 15 years it's going to take to do that work. So part of what WRRDA does is it gives us this opportunity to look at alternative financing, which we're aggressively doing now, because the federal government cannot do this on its own. But there are many, many more requirements out there than there are dollars available, and the federal government cannot do this. So we're working aggressively to find public-private partnerships, contributed funds, and other methods that will help us sustain a program that is currently unsustainable.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for putting together this anniversary discussion on WRRDA. It was a good bill. It's great to look back and talk about how good the policy was. I'd like to thank Secretary Darcy and General Bostic for their leadership on Everglades restoration in Florida. Thank you for what you've done. You've made lasting contributions to the health of the Ionic river of grass in Florida and all of these species and economies and communities that are that it supports. And thank you so much for what you've done. I'd like to focus in on Section 5014 dealing with P3, Public-Private Partnership Pilot Program, where up to 15 federally authorized projects can be transferred to non-federal entities. And I'd just like to ask maybe how much have you completed on implementation, and are there any policy changes or challenges that have arisen as the Corps has been working on implementing that P3 section? I guess I'd ask General Bostic first.
Mr. Congressman, first, we're very appreciative of what WRRDA has done, particularly in this area. Just in my previous comments talking about the funding gap for the nation, this is one of those areas where we had already been working prior to WRRDA to try to find ways to alternatively finance some of these projects. So currently we have 7 demonstration projects separate and apart from WRRDA, but they are similar to what the end state is of P3. They are efforts to look at other methods, and this is going to better inform us on the pilots that we're required to do under WRRDA. We do have some complications that we're trying to work through on the WRRDA P3 pilots. Some of that includes the budget scoring. We're working closely with OMB. I've had several meetings on how we can look at the scoring process. There are other issues that we're working through, but this is a tough one for us, but we're committed to moving forward on it. We've hired someone that wakes up every day and thinks about P3. That is their job, and they have a team that is working on this. I've met with a group of CEOs that are very anxious about participating in this. If we can find a mechanism to move forward where their investments are secure for a long term. We've done this on the energy side, on the military installations where we've done energy savings performance contracts. They are P3, and they're for investors or have helped us on our installations, and their payback is 30 or 40 years, and we've done the first one of those on a civil works project. So we've got a long way to go on this one, Congressman, but we're working it as hard as we can.
Secretary Darcy, do you have anything to add?
Just that some of the demonstration projects that General Bostic referred to are a variety of projects. They're flood control projects, they're navigation projects, looking for other ways to finance or co-finance some of maybe the dredging and not the O&M, and just being able within our authorities. And what we're looking at too is do we have any barriers within our authorities to prevent us from P3s? And if we do, we'd want to seek some probably modifications to some of those to enable us to go forward. But we're looking at actually a project that we're calling it, that would be I think it's called separate delivery, that the private sector would perform or build part of the project and the federal government would build another part. So just different ways to approach projects that we haven't in the past.
Thank you very much. Just to let you know, I know myself, Ms. Frankel, and many others on this committee are willing partners in this. I mean, it's not something we just sort of took a look at and thought, well, this might be nice. I mean, we're willing to help out in any possible way to implement this. We think it's a very good picture of what might be able to happen in the future. So, yield back.
Ms. Frankel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I would thank you all for your service, and I associate myself with Mr. Webster's remarks in regards to the Everglades, and also give you my thanks. I know we've given you a huge, complicated task, and I'm confident you will succeed. I want to focus specifically for a moment on Section 1014, which allows the non-federal sponsor to pre-fund the pre-construction engineering and design phase and the construction phases, later seek reimbursement or credit upon authorization. And that really, more specifically, are for those projects that did not receive a chief's report in the last authorization or any authorization, they can move forward with their project. And I want to use Port Everglades as an example, since I am from South Florida, and it's a huge economic generator for us, that port. We were not able to be in the chiefs in the last authorization. As you probably know, they've been waiting 18 years for a chiefs report, and they are ready, willing, and able to do the PED work. And I know you're close to a chiefs report, but now there's a couple of new roadblocks, and I'd like you to tell me how we can get past them. First, the port apparently was told that the Corps needs $77,000 to pay the expenses to negotiate a PED agreement with the port, number one. And number two, we were also told that the Corps needs to come up with another $70,000 to complete the Assistant Secretary review before the Chief's report is sent to Congress. So could you explain that to me? Aren't you getting paid? You need more money to get paid to do your job? That part I don't understand.
Congressman, I'm not aware of the details that you're providing, but we'll track this down and work this with the district. I believe this is something that we can work out. It may be working in the staff and already something that's been approved. Okay, well, that would be good if we could do that. And because, as I said, time is money, and the big ships are going to start passing Port Everglades by if they're not able to move on this. And related to Section 1014, again, do you know where you are in terms of the implementation guidance on that provision? This is currently under development.
Okay. All right. Well, okay. So you told me that last time, but I guess you're still developing it.
We're much closer than we were when we talked to you before.
All right. I'm going to go to my next question.
What I would say is that we have some of this work ongoing already, and even though we're developing this guidance, the guidance that already exists in a couple of our engineering regulations. So, for example, Miami was able to proceed with the same sort of guidance. So, and others are proceeding. So, this is not holding up any work in this area, but we're still pursuing with the guidance.
Okay. Well, I think Broward, the port in Broward, would be a very good example for you to move on. Next question. I think we spoke about this at the last hearing, which is the Broward Segment 2 Shore Protection Project, and wanted to know whether or not that's still on track to begin work in November. Is that, anybody know the answer to that? Okay, could you find that out for me?
We will.
Excellent. And last question, which is Section 208 of the WRRDA directs the Corps to assess the operation and maintenance needs of the Atlantic Intercoastal Waterway. And for us, the intercoastal down in South Florida is primarily used for recreational uses, 500,000 recreational vessels annually, with over almost a $12 billion economic impact, 66,000 jobs. It's huge for South Florida. Studies have shown that these benefits would be significantly reduced if the waterway is not properly maintained. So I'm wondering, what is your status of the intercoastal assessment?
Congressman, we're still assessing this particular section. Funds are going to be required to do this, so we're looking at the allocation of funds and the different sections, and this one has not been allocated funds to work on at this point.
All right, if you would just keep me apprised and let us know how I can help. And I know Mr. Webster, he's going to help too, right? Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Denham, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Darcy, Congress took steps last year through the House, through the Senate. President signed WRRDA. Specifically in Section 1006, allows public utility companies and natural gas companies to participate in an already established program with the Army Corps to expedite the processing of permits, For the folks I represent, this means a more transparent and timely process, one that's predictable. I understand that the Army Corps of Engineers held a listening session in September of last year to receive public input on the development of implementation. I understand that the guidance for Section 1006 still has not been issued. Can you tell us what's happening, give us an update on the status of the guidance document, and specifically what you expect to be finalized and implemented?
Yes, Congressman, earlier I said that this, I needed to get delegation authority from the Secretary of the Army, which is imminent, and I assured Congressman Schuster that it would be any day now.
Thank you. I yield back.
Ms. Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do appreciate this follow-up hearing on WRRDA. I'm particularly interested in the levies. You have authority under the current WRRDA bill to do cost sharing. And I'd like to ask a question of General Bostic and perhaps Assistant Secretary Darcy about where we are on this cost sharing, the evaluations of levies for FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program.
Congresswoman, the Corps has worked very closely with FEMA in making provisions to help identify how the USACE levy information, when we go out and do levy certifications, how we can use that for the FEMA levy certification purposes. So that work's ongoing. We're updating our policies currently to specify how that data from our detailed risk assessments, that's really what we do, is the detailed risk assessments, our inspections and our screening, and to help work with FEMA on how they can be used on the National Flood Insurance Program. So we're moving along pretty well on this. I think we're on track.
Well, the reason, General Bostic, I'm interested in it is basically I'd like to see more streamlining, and I'm wondering if you think that this cost sharing will speed up levy certification and the revision of flood maps, which, of course, follows.
I wanted to make sure I was clear in what I was talking about. That what we're doing is data sharing. So we expend a certain cost to go do our risk assessments and our inspections. And before, those were separate and distinct from what FEMA was doing. So the consumer and the American public would see these two folks coming out, but we weren't sharing information. So it's not a cost
sharing information and sharing costs as well?
In a sense, it is, because if we have paid to do a risk assessment that covers, let's say, 5 of the items that FEMA would normally need, then it saves them from having to do it. So
well, yes, that's really what I'm most interested in.
It would save costs. And that process is well underway, yeah.
Save cost and perhaps save time. I'm interested in 7th Street levy. That, of course, this is one of the most important levees in the country because it protects the entire monumental core, the Washington Monument, most of our monumental buildings, even parts of local District of Columbia neighborhoods, and certainly downtown Washington. There were problems initially with the contract. You got that back going, and last year they finished the levy. And I understand that the levy is fully operational, and I'm very pleased that that has finally occurred. That the contract itself is closed, except for very few minor matters. The Army is certifying the Army Corps is certifying the levy, and FEMA must redraw, of course, the flood maps, because after the certification, there will be whole communities that are outside of the flood maps. Now, I'm interested to know if the levy, if the Army Corps is working with FEMA, if you're working simultaneously, so that the flood map process runs concurrently with the certification process. Again, this is one of these mixed kinds of government processes that can really confound the public, since you're both working on the same on the same facility. Since you're both looking at things that are in tandem, can you do that concurrently rather than one, namely the Army Corps, move and then marches in FEMA to do some of what the Army Corps has already done, but necessitated by the fact that there are two different agencies? Why can't they simply get it done, move together, and get it over with, streamline the process?
I'm now clear on the question, ma'am, that FEMA is responsible for the levee accreditation. So the Corps will first perform the levee system evaluation that's needed for FEMA?
Simply to certify that that's a normal certification process, that this levee is good. Then here comes FEMA.
There's engineering,
yes,
design, and construction that our technical experts bring to the situation. So they do this, provide that to FEMA, and then FEMA does the accreditation. My staff is saying that in the fall of this year is when that will be done. So,
Okay, General Lay's time's expired.
Thank you.
We'll do another round of questioning. Mr. Rouser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank each of our witnesses for being here with us today. And while I was not serving in Congress when this bill passed last year, I want to thank each of you and the agency for carrying out Section 1037 that helped extend the renourishment project for Carolina Beach and vicinity, which, as you know, falls in my district. My constituents and I are very thankful to you for that. General Bostic, a couple of questions for you. You know, one part of the bill or the law that you've not written the rules for yet is Section 1038. And of course, regional sediment management is very important to my district, as protecting and renourishing our beaches gets more and more costly. The question is, what's the timeline and how will you go about implementing Section 1038 so that we can reduce or avoid future FEMA cost as well as the cost of beach renourishment?
So I'm going to have to come back to you on that. I'm not currently tracking where we're at on 1038. I'm being told it's under development.
And do you have any idea of the timeline?
We'll follow up with you, Congressman.
Okay. I want to follow up as well on your answer to a previous question dealing with Section 2008 of the WRRDA bill, specifically the Atlantic Intercoastal Waterway. You mentioned lack of funding, and I recognize that you can't save the world if you can't pay the rent. But my question is, isn't there some employee within the agency that can do that review? Is more funding really necessary for that?
The Corps is a very unique and interesting organization, and we've got great employees that bend over backwards every day. And something that's unique about us is we're project funded. Every 15 minutes, they're doing billable hours. So each bit of work they're doing is tied to a project, and they're very close. They're very closely managing that work. So if there was an extra hour in the day and extra funds for them to do that, then I'm sure that they would execute it. I just need to see where, from the district's perspective, this stands and where it stands in terms of where it would be completed in the future. But I can assure you, if there were a possible way that there was one extra person that could do the work, they would do it. But given the constraints on how we operate, they've got to set their priorities of work and base that on the project-funded needs that they have.
Let me ask this. Is there a possibility of an interagency transfer where you have excess money focused in on one project that you can transfer to this?
I'm not sure I'm following the question. You're saying money from another agency that might come?
Well, no, within your agency. Money specified for a project that could be transferred.
So a reprogramming?
Yes, sir,
Yeah.
if that's what you want to call it.
I'm not sure. That's possible. We could take a look at it.
My last question, since I've got a minute and 23 seconds left. We're at the one-year anniversary of the bill, and perhaps this question has been asked before, but I was not here to hear the answer. Only 40% of the rule has been implemented or promulgated. Why only 40%?
Part of the challenge with our start in this case is that we thought it was very important to go out to the American public and conduct listening sessions, not only with the local public, but businesses and interested parties, so that they can talk about WRRDA and talk about their concerns. So that got us off to a slow start in terms of where we would normally have started. The other thing is that this WRRDA is far different from the previous WRRDA, which is focused on projects, and we could move quickly. This is really process and policy and taking time to get that right. Although we're only at about 38%, we think by the end of the year we'll be at 50%, and then at the end of 2 years, as we're required, we'll have much of this accomplished.
Well, the end of the year, we'll start writing another bill for next year. And is there anything that we need to take into consideration to help make this process a little bit easier?
There are some issues that we are finding. There are small issues that I think we need to come back to the Congress and to the administration to sort out the way ahead, but all of that is working at this time. So if there are things that we will need, we'll be sure to work with the members and their staffs to ask for the appropriate support.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Graves, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Darcy, General Bostic, and Peabody, appreciate you being here today. Section 7007 of the WRRDA 07 bill provided a crediting provision for Louisiana coastal area, and Section 1019 of WRRDA 2014 provided some additional clarification there. Could you give an update on where we are in regard to that crediting?
On that particular section of the WRRDA bill for 2014, the implementation guidance is complete. And I think it is your question.
I'm aware that the state of Louisiana has probably in excess of $100 million in credit. And as you know, there's a section that was in the original 7007 that was also modified and included in the 1019 section of the bill last year. That allows for cross-crediting. As a matter of fact, right now, the Corps of Engineers is demanding the state of Louisiana put forth, I believe it's $1.7 million in cost share for one project, while the state has well over $100 million in existing credits before the Corps of Engineers, and the Corps has actually referred that $1.7 million cost share to the Department of the Treasury for collections. You have also shut down any potential grants to the state of Louisiana through these same agencies because you're telling the state they need to pay you $1.7 million when, again, there's over $100 million in credits that are outstanding right now.
I'm going to try to answer this question, and then I may defer to General Peabody, who may have some more specifics on it. But it's my understanding that the provision for credits needs to have an in-kind memorandum of understanding before the construction that could be credited for those credits. And in some of the cases that you're referring to, there was no in-advance memorandum of understanding between the federal government and the local sponsor.
And that's correct, and that's because Section 7007 of WRRDA 2007 explicitly stated that the credit was granted for work prior to the execution of a partnership agreement. It didn't make any reference at all to any type of MOU. The state of Louisiana was concerned that actually if they executed any type of agreement, it would invalidate the ability of them to get credit because there would be an agreement in place.
I'm going to ask General Peabody, who was...
And just to clarify, and General Peabody, I know you're aware of this, the Section 1019 of WRRDA 2014 actually expanded to where it said on the date of execution, before the date of execution, or after the date of execution.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, ma'am. So both sections you've referred to, Section 7007 of WRRDA 2007 and Section 1019 of WRRDA 2014, also make reference to Section 221 of the Flood Control Act of 1970, and there's very explicit statutory language in that statutory provision that requires a memorandum of understanding before crediting can be granted. And so I've had conversations with you in our previous jobs on this issue. We just talked with Mr. Graham from the CPRA last week, and we're in the process of working closely with him to get memorandums of understanding signed so that we can work with the state and provide the crediting that we both would like to be able to enable.
And General, I understand the attempt to interface Section 221 in this case, but as you have stated in numerous occasions, and Corps Counsel has stated, more specific, in fact, I believe WRRDA 07 actually makes the same reference in Section, in the amendments to Section 221, it specifically says, if there is another more specific provision of law, that one shall apply. And in this case, Section 7007 was a more specific provision of law. The Corps has attempted to go through and cherry pick certain provisions of 221, certain provisions of 7007, and apply those. Let me ask you this. If you agreed with my interpretation and what I believe was congressional intent, that the credit was afforded for work that was done prior to signing an MOU, MOA, partnership agreement, or anything else, would the Corps be required to accept the credit proposal submitted by the state? Meaning if the state came to you and said, here's $100 million worth of credit we believe we have, would you be required to accept that $100 million?
I think the key point is that the fundamental area where we don't see eye to eye is on having an MOU prior to the credit.
Could you just answer that question, though? Would you be required to accept the $100 million in credit proposal that the state submitted to the Corps?
Congressman, I'm not going to go into hypothetical on something where...
I can answer that. No, you still have the ability to review the credit that the state submits to determine if it's actual integral to the project or not.
So we need an integral determination to do that, Congressman. Again, that's also with other statutory provisions. I think the dilemma that the Corps has is that we can't take any particular statutory provision in isolation from other provisions of the law, and I think that's one of the things that often frustrates some of the members of Congress, because we really do need to look at all provisions of the law. I'd be happy to come visit with you on this, Congressman, and discuss the specific provisions of the 1970 Flood Control Act that you discussed. And we want to work very positively and cooperatively with the state to do this, but we also feel obligated to follow the law as we understand it.
Mr. Babin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is for Secretary Darcy. Last Friday, excuse me, I was at the Port of Houston in my 36th Congressional District, Texas, along with several other members of Congress, the chair and the co-chair of the Congressional Ports Caucus, Representative Poe and Representative Hahn from California. We got the latest briefing on a number of issues, including a very serious safety issue, and I believe I mentioned this the last time you were here before our committee. As you know, the Port of Houston and the Houston Ship Channel is one of the busiest, if not the busiest port in the nation at the time. We have 8,300 ship calls annually at the port, more than any other port in the nation. Additionally, there are 22,000 deep draft vessel moves within the channel and another 200,000 barge moves every year. The economic impact of a shutdown at the Port of Houston is estimated to cost the economy more than $300 million per day. A 3-day shutdown is a $1 billion hit to our national economy. In fact, we had this happen earlier this year, just north of what we call the Bayport Flare and the Houston Ship Channel. There are very serious safety issues right now within the Houston Ship Channel at the Bayport Flare. This is due to a design deficiency in the flare design, which needs widening and enlarging. The Corps must address this issue in a timely manner. It is penny wise and pound foolish for us to not address this critical safety issue that is present right now in the Houston Ship Channel. If there were an accident here at the Bayport Flare itself, a shutdown would impact $300 million a day, as I said, to our national economy, and we cannot allow this to happen. It's my understanding that it would cost $36 million to address this safety issue, which would be cost shared between the Corps and the Port of Houston Authority. Again, I brought this up at our last meeting. Following our last hearing, your staff was responsive and indicated that there is a 902 limit construction that cannot be exceeded. However, we have a serious safety issue. Given the significant risk to ships traveling within the channel and to our national economy, should there be an accident, I would ask that you sit down again with your team and think outside of the box, but of course within the law, to find a way to address this in a more timely manner, because nothing has been done since. Every day there's a risk at the flare which could be addressed at the fraction of the cost. Any comments there?
Congressman, I recall at our last session here this issue, and we have since determined that a project efficiency report is what's needed in order for us to see what the causes were of this deficiency, and we're on track. We've initiated that project efficiency report, and we should have that by the first of the year.
So another 6 months to go then, huh?
Yes, sir.
Also, one other issue, in the north end of my district in southeast Texas at the Sam Rayburn Reservoir, there's a major effort underway by the Army Corps of Engineers to develop a revised master plan, which is way overdue. I've been told that a number of restrictions are already being imposed on people's property in the area surrounding the lake. Some folks, some individuals, have been told that they cannot cut down weeds or brush even on their own property. And I will be following up with questions for the record on the specifics of the Sam Rayburn Reservoir issue and offering a personal invitation to you and your team to tour this site and hear firsthand from the community and from members, individuals there. But speaking generally, isn't it somewhat inevitable that by imposing the Waters of the United States rule and designating that even more of the United States U.S. waters are navigable streams, navigable waterways, that property owners across the state of Texas and the country will see more, not less, of this sort of restrictions being imposed by the federal government on private property owners?
Congressman, this Sam Rayburn specific example is one that we will follow up with you on. But as far as the expansion of Clean Water Act jurisdiction, I don't believe that the finalization of this rule is going to add to or jeopardize private property owners' rights in the water.
Well, if they're already being restricted from cutting brush on their own property because of this imposition, I think it's already a problem. So we would like to see some addressing of that, if you don't mind. And also, one other thing, if we could get that report before 6 months, well, we have a safety issue at the Bayport Flare and the Houston Ship Channel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Sanford.
Thank you, gentlemen. A couple quick questions. First is on Charleston Harbor. Civil Works Review Board for the Charleston Harbor Post 45 project. I guess the due date is June 25th. Are we on schedule to hit that date?
Yes, sir.
We are. I guess that the second part post June 25th would be if the 404 is done, Chief's report's done, are we at a point where they could begin to move forward with regard to construction?
With what? With construction? And the project has to be authorized. Once the Civil Works Review Board meets, then it goes into.
I understand, but I thought that there was a provision if those chief pieces, or those important pieces, if you will, foundational pieces were in place, then, but I'll come back to the team with regard to some language on that front. So that's first question. Two, I want to give you a compliment. One of the things, oddly enough, that's important within my district are old impounded rice fields. And they're sort of weird creatures, and they don't fall into any category. I mean, literally, the trunks that go on them come from the time of the Egyptians and controlling water level. And you could set a flap one way, and you could literally grow pine trees in there and have it arid and dry. You could set a flap another way and have it water. And apparently you guys at the district level have been most responsive to some of the landowners that, down that way with regard to easing some of the regulatory nuance and nuisance that goes with controlling these wetlands. Again, non-wetland wetlands, whatever you want to call them, and I want to say thank you. Third would be, you just mentioned, Secretary, that there would be no further restriction with regard to private property rights in the event that the new waters ruling goes into effect. I don't know how you would say that, given the fact that if you have land that's not within jurisdictional control of the Corps presently, but with the new map it would be. How would that not be a taking of private property rights?
The new rule will give more certainty to what's jurisdictional under the Clean Water Act and what is not. And I don't envision...
it might give more certainty, but it'd be an expanded view of certainty. In other words, if you look at the maps presently, there'd be land that would be controlled by a private landowner. And if you look at the new map, at least as I've seen them, there would be much more jurisdictional control by the Corps. So yes, there's certainly, but what the certainly that we know would be, yeah, there'd be more control in, whether it's cutting weeds or doing a whole host of different things on what is presently land controlled by the private sector rather than the government sector.
Under the rule, if there is a significant nexus that can be determined between the water on a person's property and a navigable water, and it attributes to a tributary and connects to another water, and if there is activity that's requested by a landowner, that will be able to determine whether it's a jurisdictional water and whether indeed any activity is needed or a permit for any activity is needed.
Hearing you but not agreeing with you, I mean, I think it's the most legalistic of stretches to define navigable water as an intermittent stream that might flood once every couple of years. I don't know how that could be possibly construed as navigable. I've done a lot of time on the water over the years, and navigable with a boat is not a place where we go where it happens to flood once every 5 years. But we'll come back to that. Last question would be this. If you were to look at the three, I guess this is for the general, most onerous mandates, in other words, you think that you could do much more with perhaps less, what would they be from the standpoint of Congress?
Well, that would be a difficult one to answer. One of the things I think that the country needs to do is to think through how we sort out priorities. We are, I think, the world's best at responding to disasters. And when there's a disaster, the country pulls together. We fund, we do things like we did post-Katrina and post-Sandy.
I've got 15 seconds, so I'm going to ask for brevity. I apologize. So one would be what?
So one would be how we set priorities across the nation.
I don't know that's a mandate or an onerous one, but okay, what's 2 and 3?
And I think part of what WRRDA does is how do we work better in the interagency so that the goals and objectives of one agency in a certain watershed, let's say, are similar and seen in the same light from the federal government.
General, I'll respectfully submit that you maybe are going to pass on this question. I get it, and I guess I'm burned through my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Rokita.
I thank the chairman. Would the gentleman like me to yield a minute to continue on with your questioning?
I don't want to torture my poor colleague there behind the witness stand.
Okay. One of the other things I would say, Congressman, is reporting and how when you look at the number of reports that we provide, and I think we could look at that and see if there's redundancy and overlap, and could we reduce the amount of reporting and hold folks accountable for what their responsibilities are.
Thank you for that. Appreciate everyone's testimony this morning. Interested in the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. How much money is in there right now?
I believe it's about no, it's more than
It's
that.
about $8 billion.
$8 billion.
$8 billion. How is the Corps working to comply with the trust fund, giving our intent to spend more in this area? And are we going to see the fiscal year 2017 budget reflect an increase in spending?
Congressman, in response to the provisions for the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund spending, there were two provisions, one for emerging harbors and one for Great Lakes. Congressman DeFazio mentioned the 10% earlier. In both our work plan and in the 16 budget, we complied with that requirement, providing both 10% in one instance and 12% in another.
So you feel you've obliged Congress's intent?
Yes.
And then in the fiscal year 2017, what are the plans?
We're still, the 17 budget is still under development, and we will,
would you plan on spending even more money in 2017 fiscal year?
I think within the budget caps that we get, or we'll look to see where the biggest need is.
Well, you can spend less in other areas, right, and still comply with the budget caps.
But we can't
spend more on the harbor maintenance, correct?
Given the overall program cap.
Inland Waterways Trust Fund, the barge industry has, as you know, had a 9% increase in their diesel tax through the ABLE Act. Did the President's most recent budget fully account for the increased revenue attributed to the user fee increase?
The anticipated increase from the user fee was between, I think, $30 and $35 million, and I believe we did. And that's anticipated for the 17 budget as well. So
the President matched that in his budget? Is that what you're saying?
No, because what comes from the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund has to be matched from General Treasury.
Inland Waterways Trust Fund.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Inland Waterways Trust Fund.
Right. So it seems like the President's budget may have lowballed the revenue compared to industry estimates. Do you agree or disagree? And even if the estimates, and even the estimates of the Appropriations Committee, I guess like the last question what I'm getting to is why is the President lowballing the spending estimate when we could be spending more on infrastructure?
I think part of what really changed here, the dynamics, is what happened with Olmsted when the Congress decided the cost share for Olmsted would go from to 85-15. When we went from 50-50 to 85-15, that caused more money to be available in the Inland Waterways Trust Fund. We believe that money is going to be needed in the future, and we certainly are working with the Inland Waterways Users Board to project what the requirements are going to be. So we believe the ABLE Act money, the tax there, and the additional money not being used in Olmsted will be put to good use in future years.
What's your definition of future?
The immediate future.
Yeah, future is now.
Right. We were in an immediate transition, I think, this year.
Mr. Peabody, do you have anything to add?
So I think that the Chief has pretty much got it right. That there's the two things that happened were the additional 9 cents, but also the Olmsted, which is temporary. When we finish or substantially complete Olmsted in the next probably 4 to 5 years, then the additional fundings, whatever's accrued above what we have not allocated on an annual basis, I think that'll get bought down fairly quickly. Now, we're working through several different funding scenarios, and of course, we fund on an annual basis, so it's very difficult to predict how those funding scenarios will play out. But the key is that the current projects under construction, the 4 major projects under construction, and there's others that we could do some work on, those will quickly consume that additional revenue once Olmsted is complete.
Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Darcy, General Bostic. General Peabody, I didn't think I'd get a chance to sit here with you again. Welcome back. And if I don't see you again after this, after my 5 minutes is up, good luck.
I'm going to come see you tomorrow, sir.
Oh, lucky you.
No, sir, lucky you.
You are a glutton. You are a glutton for punishment, man. Hey, General, thank you, and I do can't wait to see you tomorrow, and I do wish you well in your impending retirement. This 1-year anniversary, I'm glad to be here today to talk about it. However, the most important anniversary today is my wife and I's 20th, so I hope she has a very happy anniversary, because I want to see some more progress on the anniversary of WRRDA. This is what frustrates somebody like me who used to work on these issues as a staffer, and I enjoy having all of you come in front of our committee and meeting individually to talk about issues that are important to my district, our waterways, our water infrastructure. But it just seems like we have so many questions that just don't get answered, or it just takes so long. I know that might be institutional, but I think we're all here to fix that. And we want to make sure that the Corps is willing partners to do that. I included, along with my colleague, Congresswoman Bustos, provision in WRRDA for 15 P3 projects. I know my colleague, Mr. Webster, asked about these earlier, and I think the response was, this is a tough one, and you still have a long way to go. I don't find that acceptable as the person who wrote the language. What is so tough and hard about us trying to put new and innovative approaches toward fixing our water infrastructure projects? So, Secretary Darcy, can you give me a timeline as to when we can start to see at least one of these 15 projects moving forward? I'll take them all in the 13th District of Illinois if you'd like.
Congressman, I think that some of the projects that we mentioned earlier, I think as far as a P3 approach, are further along than others. It's my hope that we'll be able to get at least one of these P3 demonstrations before the year is out. And hopefully we can build on the experience from that to work toward others and the goal of the 15 that was in the WRRDA bill.
We just put that in as a new approach. We want to see investment in water infrastructure. That's why WRRDA is so crucial. I have my constituents who rely upon the inland waterway system come to my office. At first, when I got here a little over 2.5 years ago, they said, you're not going to be able to pass WRRDA without earmarks. Well, we did. And we actually changed policies, which I think make it easier for the Corps, I hope, to work with us to implement our changes. And then when we passed those policies, they said, well, you'll never be able to find a source to ensure that the Inland Waterway Trust Fund and Harbor is fully funded. Well, we did. We as an organization, as Congress, we did our job. And now those same individuals come in and say, what are you going to do to ensure that that surplus is not used for other purposes? Well, it's a novel idea, I tell them. Let's get these projects moving forward. It's been way too long. You have so many good people working for you at the Corps of Engineers. If there's something we need to do to be able to help expedite this, let us know. But we can't continue to just have hearings like this with promises of maybe one of 15 P3s will be implemented by the end of the year. We authorized 15. We didn't authorize one. I want people to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, because we're asked to do that on a regular basis. And I think the Corps of Engineers should be able to do that too. Now I want to end with a thank you. I do want to thank the Corps of Engineers, especially in and around the St. Louis and Rock Island districts for working with the Snai Levee Drainage District, work out a problem with a flood level certification discrepancy with FEMA. And that's something that I do appreciate the men and women who work out in the district offices on the ground are providing that great service. So I got a bunch of other questions, but I don't have a lot of time. So I'm going to leave you by saying thanks for your service. Thanks for being here. My frustration's not going to be alleviated until we start to see progress. And General Peabody, again, congratulations on your retirement, and I will give you the rest of the questions tomorrow. I yield back.
Thank you. Well, start a second round of questions. Secretary Darcy, did you receive a memorandum with enclosures dated approximately April 27th of this year from General Peabody, which communicated serious concerns and deficiencies with the so-called Clean Water Rule and the rulemaking process for the rule?
Yes, I did.
Can you please provide me a copy of that and for the hearing record and all the memo and the enclosures?
I will have to check with counsel, sir.
Pardon?
I will have to check with my counsel.
So you think there's some concern about providing the committee with that? That should be open, transparent. It's an internal document, but I think everything's open to this committee.
As I'd be happy to provide it on the advice of counsel.
Okay. Let me ask you then, that memorandum that you received from General Peabody, what steps did you take? Did you hold meetings? Did you respond to the Corps had some serious concerns about the process, the Clean Water Rule, and what's in the Clean Water Rule?
We took those concerns and talked through them and walked through them with the Environmental Protection Agency before finalizing the rule.
You took those to who?
Our colleagues at the Environmental Protection Agency, because we were jointly developing this rule.
And OMB, was they involved in this?
That was not shared with OMB to my knowledge.
Okay. Ms. Darcy, WRRDA 2014, specifically sections 1007 and 1008, allows for the expedited considerations for reviewing and processing applications from non-federal entities to modify or improve hydropower in all eligible federal water resource projects. Why has implementation of this section been delayed, and has any non-federal interest approached the Corps to pursue an activity under the new 408 requirements?
As far as 107, section 1007 goes, that's the one I mentioned earlier that I'm just waiting for the delegation authority from the Secretary of the Army, but that's ready to go. The one I referenced is Congressman Schuster, that was imminent. And to my knowledge, we have not had a request yet from a utility or a hydropower person to use that sort of 214 provision, but I can double check with that. But last I heard, we had not had any requests.
But you're moving forward with implementation?
Yes, sir.
Okay. General Bostic, you stated in multiple hearings that we got an 18 billion list of old inactive projects that be deauthorized by September 2015. Is this the interim list or the final list of projects that will be coming forward by this September?
By September is the interim list, which is the all-inclusive list of what we might want to deauthorized. And then we'll come back to the Congress in about April with the $18 billion.
The final list, April next year?
Final list. Right.
Okay, thank you. Section 1023 allows for, General Bostic, allows for non-federal interests to contribute funds to their projects that go over the cost limit. Have any projects to date taken advantage of this? And how many projects do you expect to exceed the cost limit before the end of this 2016?
This is 1014. Chairman, can you say that again, which section you're...
Section 1023 that allows for the non-federal interest to contribute funds when the project goes over the cost limit, is anybody taking advantage of this? And then also, do you expect any, how many projects do you expect to exceed that cost limit by the end of next year?
Okay, since 2012, we've
how many? It's 902 fixes.
47.
Pardon?
47 agreements since 2012, and it's been about $105 million.
So this is General Peabody. So, sir, what I would anticipate is because of the additional streamlining that your provision allowed, and we just recently published the guidance for this, that we could anticipate that we would see an acceleration in number and quantity, assuming that there are cost-share partners who are willing to come to us with contributed funds.
So,
but we do not have a projection on how that's going to change. We're going to need some time and experience to see how this actually plays out before we will be able to do that.
Well, how many 902 fixes do you anticipate?
How many
902 fixes do you anticipate?
Sir, I'm going to have to get back to you on that.
Okay, and my first part of that question, have we had any non-federal interest contribute funds over the cost limit?
I'm not aware of any, sir, but I'll check with the staff.
Okay, appreciate that. Last question here on Secretary Darcy dealing with WIFIA. The Corps stated that they are not developing WIFIA implementation guidance, and instead of developing a feasibility analysis to determine whether a WIFIA program could be effectively developed and implemented if funded. The EPA, as you may know, is actively developing its implementation guidance. Is the Corps consulting with the EPA regarding WIFIA development?
Yes. Yes, we are.
Okay. Is the Corps consulting with other agencies to have loan and guarantee programs like Department of Transportation?
Yes, sir.
What does the feasibility analysis need to determine in order for the Corps to issue an implementation guidance? What are you looking for? And the feasibility analysis, what do you need to determine to get to that implementation guidance? Because we are clear in the law, we want to move forward with WIFIA, and we're looking for the implementation guidance. What's the issue? What's the challenge here for you? General?
Looking at the potential benefits as they would apply specifically to the civil works projects, and looking at what would actually be eligible. So there's some just details that we're looking at in terms of the potential benefits to civil works specifically. But we've been working very closely with EPA and others that have experience with this. And as we've said before, we are searching for alternative financing methods. This is one of those that we believe can help, but we're just not as experienced in it, so we're aggressively pursuing it.
Yeah, well, I'm a big advocate for this. I think you're correct. It's just a great way to bring some private capital in, and I would encourage the Corps to consult with these entities like Department of Transportation that's has experience in the EPA, and if you have to bring in outside people, I think which is a good program, we can move forward. Because if we don't get it off the ground, it's a pilot, we're going to have some challenges. Ms. Napolitano, are you any questions? Go ahead.
Of course. Thank you so very much. I will have to make this real short, but I do have a question, Ms. Darcy. In your page 8 of your report, Water Supply and Reservoir Management, it refers to the subsection A of 1046. This refers to arid regions. I'm looking at the public law, but the second section of that, because that was under A, dam optimization. Section B, updated report. Not later than 2 years after the date of enactment of this Act, Secretary shall update and make publicly available the report entitled Authorized and Operating Purposes of Corps of Engineers Reservoirs, dated July 1992. Now, that was, which was produced pursuant to Section 311 of the Water Resources Development Act of 1990. And in the inclusions, there are any recommendation, Secretary, relating to the significant review, to that review, the Secretary determines to be significant, and it goes on. That component directs the Corps to update its report, which is 23 years old, on this particular area. It is of significant importance to the country, mostly the West, as we look to the drought and to whether we can maximize water storage and aquifer recharge in light of the authorized purpose authorized in 2014. Now, are you expecting to meet that date, and can we figure out how we can get information so that we are able then to either assist or formulate policy to help you along those areas?
For 1046A, we're at the moment, I thought we were in progress on that one, but I apologize. I'm going to have to get, we are in progress. Okay.
Implementation guidance under development.
Right. The implementation guidance for that section is under development. But I think your question, too, is how we can communicate more closely with you as we develop this report that's necessary. Is that, and I think that we should commit to be.
Well, you have one more year to go on that
Yes.
report. And what I'm asking is there a way to be able to know whether you're going to be able to meet that deadline?
We'll make every effort to do so.
I'm sorry?
We'll make every effort to do so.
Well, may we be kept up to date, because we'd
Yes,
like to
ma'am.
be able to help, whether it's a funding issue or whether it's an issue of anything that might help. It is critical, it is important given the drought cycles that we're experiencing and the fact that we're going to be needing all the help we can get. So insofar as that 23-year-old report, I think it's time that we did give it some significant review. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Rice, you have the floor.
Thank you to the panel for being here. Always instructive to hear from the Corps. I haven't been in politics all that long, I guess 4 years now, between county council and now Congress. And I'm concerned that any project that requires Corps approval in my district it never seems to happen without a great deal of intervention. It seems the Corps has become an entity that obstructs rather than promotes these projects. I heard Mr. Peabody's discussion earlier about how the country has forgotten the importance of infrastructure and its effect on natural resources and commerce and the economy and so forth. And I don't think that's true. I think that, at least in my district back home, that we are struggling and gnashing our teeth and pulling our hair trying to get projects done, and that the Corps plays more of a role of obstruction than anything else. And it is incredibly frustrating and concerning to me. Highway 31, when I was on county council and held up for 2 years, and finally when I got to Congress and started meeting with people at the Corps, and I'm sorry, I only have 5 minutes. I can't even list all these things and let you respond adequately in the 5 minutes I have, but it was held up for years because they shortened the road by 2 miles and expanded an intersection, and they required, years worth of surveys and a lot of money being spent when we had the money in the bank to build the road and employ people in the worst time in our economy, and yet it was held up for years by requirements placed on us by the Corps because an environmental group wrote a letter. Bucksport Marine Industrial Park, which is pending right now, been working on a permit for that for about 4 years now. There's an existing commercial marina there, and they want to expand it, and yet it takes 4 years of permitting time, and we've just heard back from the Corps that they think they've changed the scope of the project, which was requested by the Corps, and now the Corps thinks that change in scope wants them to go back to ground zero and start again. International Drive in my home county of Horry County, they've been working on permitting this road for years and years and years. Again, an environmental group wrote a letter to the Corps, and they have held back the permit now for an unstated reason and for an unstated period of time. The Georgetown Port, I know Secretary Darcy in particular has been very helpful in trying to get the port dredged, and Chairman Schuster mentioned it earlier. When I became a congressman, I went to the Corps and asked them what we needed to get it dredged. They told me that we needed to go and find $33 million and we could get it done. And we found the money with Secretary Darcy's help. And then they came back and said, "Oop, no, we were wrong. It's not $33 million, it's $67 million." And so now I have to go back to my constituents at home and explain to them why, when they voted themselves a penny sales tax on a referendum to have this port dredge, that, no, we were wrong. The actual cost is double what they told us it was going to be. And then on I-73, we've got a road that part of it has been built by my home county, 18 miles, getting as close to the border of the county as they can out toward I-95. We need 41 more miles to connect to 95 and then on past the North Carolina border to I-74. They say we're going to destroy 278 acres of wetlands in that stretch of road, and to mitigate for that, they're proposing that the Corps, is pushing a plan that proposes we buy 6,800 acres to mitigate for 278 acres at a cost of $20 million. And the level of absurdity here is just mind-boggling. That, we've been working on that permit, I don't know, 5 years plus, and we're still apparently years away. And it appears to me that the Corps' function has become to respond to these environmental groups on general unfounded allegations and to stifle progress on every front. And it is incredibly frustrating. At a time when the economy is dragging and we could be putting people to work, and we've got the money here ready for 3 out of 4 of these projects, ready to build. It's not that we got to find financing. It's just that we've got to jump through 4,000 flaming hoops in front of us. So here's my question. I'm sorry it took me so long to get to it. Please help me to unwind this labyrinth. Please give me recommendations to make your job easier, or to limit reasonably the scope of people of interest that have a bite at the apple of holding these things up, or the number of bites at the apple that they have. Because the place that we have got ourselves, and I don't know who put us here. I don't know if you guys put us here in the Corps, or if the Congress put us here, but where we are is in a very bad place. And we are stifling progress. And we are keeping people out of work. And we are holding back our economy. And we desperately need to unwind this labyrinth. Thank you very much.
Ms. Frankel.
Thank you very much. You have a very challenging, complicated task. I have a general question, which is, why do you change the district commanders every 3 years?
It's a great question. The part of this is we're developing our officers, our senior leaders in most commands. Those officers change every 2 years. And we have come back in working with the Chief Staff of the Army, the Secretary of the Army in these districts, except for the young lieutenant colonels. The colonels are there for 3 years. And there are other assignments that they have to go on and help serve the nation in order for them to continue to move on and get their own experience. And what we rely on is great civilians to help execute and provide that continuity. So while the Corps is 34,000 strong, only 700 are military. And many of those are commanders and deputy commanders, but they have great civilians that are helping to run the organization. But it's mainly on their leader development.
Have you ever considered a different way to do it?
I'm not sure if my predecessors have. I have looked at different options of actually moving some earlier if, for example, they don't have joint experience and they need joint experience. They haven't deployed and we need to get them service in a deployed environment or on major staff. Some have extended, but not many have gone longer. We do take a couple of commanders that have a lot of experience and put them in a second command. but generally we would not go beyond the 3 years. I have not thought about doing that, primarily for the reasons I stated before.
So I think what you're saying is that the main purpose of these district commanders is for their own personal development in their career, which means really that I guess your civilian force is running the operation.
I'd say
That's not a criticism. That's really just a question.
It's more of a team effort. It's a team effort, and I just spoke to the new commanders yesterday. About half of them have experience in U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, about half don't. We've got a good experience about bringing them in, transitioning. They're learning from a fire hose for those first 6 months or so, but they have great civilians and a great structure, and they can come from the district to the division to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers headquarters for expertise and support. But when you compare our district commanders to let's say a commander that's going to take a brigade combat team into combat, those are 2-year commanders. Sometimes they're extended, but those are very difficult, very tough missions. The only difference is we grow up on the combat side often as opposed to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers side. But it's a valid point that you raise.
And the reason I raise it, because I think part of the frustration for those of us who are we're trying to see projects move along is that when there is new leadership, there is a learning curve, and then you're having to sort of reintroduce all the issues that you have been discussing for so many years. It's like it's over and over again. So I don't know whether there's a better way to do it. I can understand your point, but I think you can understand the frustration that we feel in having to almost repeat ourselves every time a new player comes into the role.
And we should do our jobs, and we work very hard at it, is making sure that the transition is seamless as possible. But one of the other things I'd say about new commanders, they bring fresh ideas, they look at challenges differently, but most of them, we talk to them, don't come in and try to change everything overnight. These are systems and processes at work, but some things do need change, and the questions that they ask cause us to think about why we're doing things that may not make logical sense.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
I just want to editorialize a little bit. I've had that conversation with General Peabody. I think this raises an interesting question. The conversation I had with General Peabody on the civilian side, I think he's trying to implement a program to help, because in the military side, the officers have gone through a lot of training how to adapt certain issues and handle certain situations, and there's a culture maybe in the civilian side, and especially on the regulatory side, that I think General Peabody's been trying to address and build that. I don't know what the right words are, but I want to expound on that. Go ahead, General.
Sure, sir. So I guess this comes from my personal reflection that I'm the product of 35 years of service, over 10% of which has been in formal military schooling on top of some civilian schooling, advanced civilian schooling that the Army sent me to. When you look at the investment that we make in our civilians, we do invest in their education and training, but we don't have the same kind of system that focuses on the doctrinal understanding of how the Corps works. And the Corps is every bit as complicated in its own way as the Army is. And so, in fact, I just took a briefing and sent General Bostic and Secretary Darcy a note, I think it was last week or the week before. We have the former executive director from the Society of American Military Engineers and a former Corps and active duty military officer, Bob Wolf, Dr. Bob Wolf, who we have under contract, and he's working with several of our folks to develop the outlines of a kind of a training and doctrine approach for the Corps. Not for the military guys, because we tend to get taken care of, and we do tend to focus on them, Congressman Frankel, for the very reason you highlighted, which is they come in, they have a very short period of time, and so we need to spin them up quickly and get them focused. But we really, the stability that I think is your concern, ma'am, really is provided by the civilian, experts. Mr. Steve Stockton sitting behind me is the key advisor I go to, and so all my wacky ideas go through the leavening process of of talking to Steve, because he's got 40 years of experience. He's seen pretty much everything, often multiple times. But we need to kind of accelerate that experience. We can't afford to wait 40 years. So if we can develop this kind of policy orientation, statutory orientation, doctrinal program, that we won't be able to invest the kind of, time and energy that I benefited from as a military officer, but we can, we think, put together some webinars and some periodic face-to-face training for short periods of time that does focus our civilian workforce as they matriculate up through the leadership ranks, starting basically at the district level and then, moving up through division and headquarters, to provide this broader understanding that I think if we can develop this over time, will help get at many of the concerns and issues that this committee has addressed with us today. It'll never be perfect, but I think just having a system that causes us to understand how things work, and I think most importantly, as the Chief pointed out, question ourselves about what we can do to change things and improve, I think putting that system in place, will give us an institutional opportunity to improve.
I think that would help, because obviously I don't think we're going to change the policy of the Department of Defense on the 10-year, and I don't think that the colonels come into the districts, have a long aspiration to stay there forever either in the district. So that might be a good way to address the issue.
And sir, if I could highlight, Mr. Brown, our Chief of Planning, just reminded me, the one area where we probably have most advanced this concept is in the planning arena. I mean, the key reform mechanism multiple mechanisms that you put in WRRDA were related to planning, the one phase, and do away with the recon studies and the 3x3x3 into law and all that. But if you look at the history of our planning program, really over the last 15 years, this is part of a larger continuum of reforms that we've attempted to put in place, which includes the Planning Associates Program. It includes IEPRs. It includes model certification. All of these things over time will start to build momentum and increase our efficiency and effectiveness. And it's kind of difficult to point to one single thing and say that was the magic moment or that was the magic elixir. But together, I think that these things will actually work to achieve the kinds of things that both of us want to realize.
Mr. Graves, you have the last question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you saw in the last line of questioning, I'm not sure that going to necessarily get answers, and so maybe I thought that before I ask any other questions, I want to lay out just a little bit of background. I just sat here and typed out some things that I recalled and looked up a little bit. I want to lay out the climate of what's happening in Louisiana and kind of help to define some of the frustration that we have. In some of the appropriations bills following Hurricane Katrina, the Corps was required to develop this LACPR report. It was due in December of 2007. I don't remember which year it was, but I want to say it was about 3 or 4 years late. Section 4303 required that a study on outfall canals be sent. It had a statutory deadline. It was late. We required that a report identifying levee work for pre-Katrina deficiencies versus the new levee standard be issued. It was late. They required that a Louisiana Water Resources Council be established to do the peer review work. That was set up years later. Section 7004 of WRRDA 2007 required that they establish a task force. That still hasn't been set up. They required that an integration team be established under the task force. That hasn't been set up. They required that a comprehensive plan be due in December of 2008. It still hasn't been done. The MRGO restoration plan was due in May of 2008. It was submitted years late. Section 7007, we discussed the credit issue earlier, that there's the disagreement right now. It looks like the state of Louisiana is going to be suing the Corps of Engineers under the 2007 and the 2014 laws now, because the Corps is coming up with interpretations that I don't agree with, and obviously people in the state and the Attorney General's office don't agree with. 7006 of 07 required that they submit construction reports for 5 projects. They were submitted late. 7006 also required that 4 feasibility reports be submitted by December 2009. All of those were late or maybe even haven't been submitted yet. I don't recall on those. Another set of 6 projects were due, project reports were due in December of 2008. They were submitted years late. Section 7011 required that a report be done, a status report be done. I think it was at least 6 years later. I'm fairly certain that has not been submitted. Section 7014 of WRRDA 2007 required that the Corps provide specific project recommendations in the LACPR report. When that report was finally issued, there was not a single project that was actually explicitly recommended. Section 1019 of WRRDA 2014 on the crediting said that they had to have the crediting and the cross-crediting all identified and worked out with the state of Louisiana, which would have been in September of last year. The first time they called the state of Louisiana was in October, and the cross-crediting work to date has still not been worked out. Section 1010 of WRRDA 2014 required that this notice of construction completion allow an appeals process when the non-federal sponsor does not agree that the project be completed. The Corps has come back to the state when the state of Louisiana has tried to implicate that provision, and they've said that that does not apply to work from Hurricane Katrina. Section 2013 of the 2014 bill said that the operations and maintenance of the Western Closure Complex and the Inner Harbor Navigation Canal shall be the responsibility of the Corps of Engineers with a non-federal cost share, and the Corps has rejected taking over O&M there. So, look, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated with these guys, and I think y'all all know that, and you like me kind of like a migraine. But all of this goes back to years and years of frustration where Congress has come in over and over again and provided explicit deadlines, explicit requirements, and over again, the Corps of Engineers has largely invented their own interpretation or done what they wanted. And so I think that our frustrations at home in Louisiana are well-founded. As we discussed at the last hearing, we have the Corps of Engineers coming out and with the EPA and issuing these WOTUS regulations and talking about how important water, clean water, and wetlands are in the United States. And as I've said at 2 hearings now, the Corps of Engineers is the cause of the greatest loss of wetlands historically and prospectively in the United States. The credibility here is incredibly frustrating, and I referenced the $1.7 million. The Corps has indicated that the state owes on the LCA 6 projects. The Corps of Engineers owes us state money right now on Davis Pond and Carnarvon. You're refusing to provide the funds. Should we refer that should the state refer that to a collection agency as well, as the Corps is trying to do, and we have $100 million in credit built up right now? Look, I know y'all don't agree with me, and I'm not even going to ask you for a response. But I just want to be crystal clear that the frustrations that the state of Louisiana has, the frustrations that I have, Secretary Darcy, you and I sat side by side and wrote many of these provisions in 2007 that are being wholly ignored. The frustrations are very well founded. And I understand that you're being told certain things up your chain of command, and in many cases, I don't believe that the things you're being told are accurate. And in many cases, I'm believing that you're probably having your strings pulled by OMB and pushing you in a different direction. But Hurricane Katrina cost the country over $100 billion. $100 billion to respond. You all know that we could have prevented those lives that were lost, and we could have prevented that expenditure by spending a fraction of that money. And you're going to see that same scenario play out over and over and over again until things change. It's going to require fundamental change. And I hope that we see a new direction for the Corps of Engineers moving forward, because otherwise we're going to have profound consequences to the environment, to the economy, and to lives moving forward. And it's incredibly disappointing.
You can respond if you want to.
One thing I'd like to say, in all due respect, Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005, and when Isaac hit 7 years later, and the president said that the hurricane storm damage risk reduction system would be complete. And when Isaac hit, we weren't late. It was largely done. It was done to a high standard, on time, to a high quality. It's the envy of the international community to come to New Orleans and see the work that the Corps of Engineers and the interagency had accomplished. I'm not going to go down each and every item that the congressman has raised, but I will say, from the president, Mayor Landrieu, the people of New Orleans, they were very appreciative of the end result of the work that we needed to accomplish. There's a lot of reasons for why things are late, not on time, and we aggressively pursue everything that the Congress tells us to do. We don't come up with our own rules. We don't come up with our own projects. We don't come up with our own money. We do what is authorized and appropriated, and we ignore nothing. If sometimes it seems that we misinterpret or interpret the law differently than others, but we're willing to sit down, Congressman Graves, and continue to work through these issues. We've got the best people in the world that are highly dedicated and want to do the right thing for the people of not only New Orleans, but for the rest of the country, and we're committed to doing that.
I would just like to respond. I think the Corps is dedicated personnel and want to do the right thing for the country. I think that's obvious. I've seen the workings with General Peabody and Secretary Darcy and General Bostic. General Bostic, you came out to my district there a year or so ago in an important local area, if you remember, in Zor. Appreciate that. I guess my concern is, well, first of all, Secretary Darcy, on the back of my question on the Clean Water Rule, or WRRDA, I would appreciate if you could respond as fast as you can when you talk to Council to get a response.
I'll get it to you today, sir.
Okay. And then secondly, I think what I've seen in 4.5 years as chairman of this committee, working with the Army Corps, I've seen some things that I think are out of the hands of the Army Corps engineers. And I think I'm witnessing that on the WRRDA rule. And I think I'll be interested to see what the Army Corps' thoughts, internal thoughts were that I mentioned earlier, and how the EPA responded, because the EPA on the WRRDA rule that they implemented last week is more damaging to our economy, and I think it actually erodes our the strides we've made on water quality for reasons I've stated before. When you pile on more red tape and bureaucracy, it doesn't help protect the environment, and that you know, we could have a chance to go backwards. But I'm really concerned about that. But I think the rule that they implemented is worse than what they proposed rule after the hearings we had, because when I look at the substantial nexus, the ditch, the exceptions that there's about 4 or 5 exceptions that put ditches back into WOTUS, that I think it includes almost every ditch, if you think through that. And to think that we had to actually put in the rule that we specifically exempt swimming pools and puddles just goes to show you that I think that the whole thing is broken, the process is broken. So I look forward to seeing that memo that was created internally, but I also look forward to continue to work with the Corps and implementation of WRRDA. That's what this hearing primarily was about today, and we've got some challenges there yet, but I think we can get there. And we made a big deal about the new mechanism we put in there for developing what the needs are out there, and we need to work with that, and it has to come back to this committee so we can authorize that and keep this economy good. Supply the infrastructure, the maritime infrastructure, to provide increase our competitiveness in the global marketplace. I see you want to respond to something.
I wanted to respond to both you and Congresswoman Frankel's comments about the district commanders changing so frequently, and I totally, I think one of the reasons that people don't like to see them change so often is not only because of the learning curve, but because of the quality of the officer that you have leading these districts and these divisions. And one of the reasons you have those quality officers is because people like General Bostic, who's the chief of engineers, looks at these officers and makes a determination of what the best fit is for each of these districts and each of these divisions. And his experience in the G1 and the Army has helped with that, plus his concern for and his dedication to making sure that these are the best officers to deliver for what the mission is for the Civil Works program. So,
but I do think General Peabody has actually hit on something on the additional training on the civilian side. I think that would be beneficial and help maybe mitigate some of those concerns. So thank you for being here today, and this committee stands adjourned.